Welcome to this episode of IQ Hit List. IQ Hit List is Inconvenient Questions one-on-one interview that explores the views of an individual that we are very, very certain you do want to see. I'm Viswa Sadasivan. My guest today is known as Singapore's matriarch author. When you look at her, you realize that she doesn't look anything like a matriarch. She's tough, she's extremely attractive, you could even say sexy, but that would be sexist, wouldn't it? Yeah. She's published 9 collections of short stories, 5 novels, and 2 poetry collections. In other quarters, she's been viewed as a big-time troublemaker. She's been known to accuse the ruling party, also known as the PAP, of being lofty and arrogant, and has taken quite a few hits herself for ignoring what the Singapore government has termed OB, or out of bounds markers. Any guesses who I'm talking about? Well, here she is, Dr. Catherine Lim. Catherine, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, sir.
Right. Let's go straight into it.
Absolutely.
How did you feel when you got chastised, when you wrote the piece about the great
affective divide?
Divide? And you were one of the few people who got a very strong response, a robust response from the late Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. How did you feel at that point in time?
Well, that was like more than 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I remember
94.
I remember my shock. I thought I had written a completely innocuous political commentary. Nobody told me anything, gave me any inkling about the shock. It was on a Sunday morning, I recollect, when I went out groggily in my nightgown and picked up the newspaper and saw the headlines, and something exactly in these words about the government saying I had gone beyond the pale and I had to be curbed. Goodness, and immediately linked that with a defamation suit.
Have you been curbed?
Well, not explicitly. Since then, nobody has actually come up and say, look, you are not allowed to do this, you are not allowed. No. Strangely, contrary to the explosion of anger, they have not really tried to curb me.
No, isn't that an interesting thing? Because you have probably said some of the most critical comments, right? And even citing individuals, key individuals, like Mr. Lee Kuan Yew,
yes.
Mr. Goh Chok Tong when he was incumbent Prime Minister. Yes. And you were blunt and straight about it.
Yes.
Right? You had made some really strong remarks, and let me quote one. You in the Great Affective Divide article 1994, you said, and I quote this: higher education, a more affluent lifestyle, and exposure to the values of the Western societies have created a new generation that is not satisfied with the quantitative paradigm, but looks beyond it to a larger qualitative one that most certainly includes matters of the heart, soul, and spirit. The absence of this affective dimension in the PAP framework is what has alienated the people from their leaders.
Yes.
Very strong language.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yet, you survived.
I survived.
It has not made you feel that you need to tone down?
No.
I don't sense fear?
No, Viswa. But I have to be very careful. In fact, I have to be my own best check. I would like to keep a respectful tone. So even though I'm passionate about certain issues, I would like to know that I have gone about it in an informed and principled way. For me, that's extremely important for a political commentator. Informed, principled, and in terms of style, using a measured tone. So I don't want to be seen as strident.
What exactly does measured tone mean?
Oh, okay. Respectful. In other words, you don't go shrieking and ranting and raging.
Respectful, but not deferential.
No, you don't have to be deferential. It can be respectful. I can explain, for example, my passionate commitment to democratic rights, civic liberties, and so on. In fact, that's my passion. But you don't have to go about it in a way that is demeaning to the ruling party.
Rambunctious.
Absolutely, yes.
Pugnacious.
Pugnacious and belligerent and discourteous.
But just for argument's sake, right? Shouldn't people be focusing more on the content, the substance? Because different people, because we're all made differently, wired differently, we have different educational background.
Yes.
Sometimes we may not even have the benefit of the facility of the language. So because of these reasons, different people actually articulate their thoughts differently,
Yes.
using different language,
Yes.
different tone.
Yes.
So why should we be so bothered as a society by the tone that people adopt? Instead of that, go past that and just focus on where they're coming from. Why can't we do that?
Yeah.
I mean, you are lucky, you've got the facility of the language. Somebody else may
Yes,
not.
yes.
He may
yes.
resort to Hokkien bedwords.
Well, I suppose when I write, I aim my writing at a certain level of language use, at a certain level of intellectuality, and that makes me comfortable. So in a way, I'm a kind of a niche writer. I will feel
You're
uncomfortable.
atas,
Sorry?
You're atas.
Atas. No. Not snobbish. No, definitely
No,
not.
but how? I'm sure you can at the same time relate to viewpoints expressed by people who may not have the benefit of a lengthy formal education.
Yes,
right?
definitely.
So in a society that aspires to be less elitist, should we not also provide greater opportunity for people who may not have the facility of the language to say their piece in whatever way they want, as long
Yes.
as they mean well?
Yes, obviously. You know, my writing doesn't mean that automatically I exclude certain people. Obviously, I talk to taxi men all the time and I use Singlish because that's the kind of language that they are comfortable in. So in other domains, I'm very comfortable not using this arty, atas English as you like. But generally, if I do a political commentary, it's aimed at a certain kind of audience.
Okay. Now, you said earlier on that when you write, you are careful about making sure you're measured
Yes.
in your tone. What does measured mean?
Okay.
Do you feel that, when you say measured, you can be measured, but the person on the receiving end could be hypersensitive.
Yes.
So
yes.
it's quite
Yes.
subjective. Do you think the government today has become more or less sensitive?
You know, it's a very mixed situation. You know, on the one hand, I feel that they are more tolerant. You know, they are more prepared to listen to a few more critical voices. But on the other hand, there are certain incidents that seem to show me, my God, they are as thin-skinned as ever.
And some say even more thin-skinned.
Even more thin-skinned.
So can you give one or two examples of that?
For example, using, as I've said, you know, this heavy juggernaut PAP machinery against little situations that probably don't warrant that use.
Are you referring
I'm
to Amos?
referring to the Amos case.
Amos as a little situation?
Yeah.
Why? Well, there are people who were actually affronted on behalf of the government.
Yes,
right?
And I don't blame them, you know.
Okay.
But now I'm talking about my personal reaction. So we all react in different ways. Now, up to a certain point, I'll mention that point later. Up to a certain point, my situation is, here is a young, bratish, you know, ill-behaved young person, probably wanting a lot of attention and reveling in it. He got a BBC interview. But there was one point when I got angry. I really got angry. Now, I'll tell you what it was. When he falsely accused his bailer of sexually molesting him, I said, wait a minute, I wouldn't let him go off easily with just an apology. I would go all out to punish that because that is irresponsible. And I'm sure he was aware of the possible serious consequences. You don't accuse people like that. I would have given it to him if I were the parent. But it seems to me more a question of parents coming in, or his church elders coming in to really put a youngster in his place when he has done wrong. And this was a case, it seems to me, of real wrong. You cannot falsely accuse a person.
Yeah, but still, subsequently, you had written pieces that were critical of the government's high-handed approach in dealing with him. What did you consider? I mean, you were irritated by him.
Yes.
Okay, you would have wanted him chastised.
For that, not for
But subsequently, you felt, you wrote and indicated that you felt that the government's approach to him was high-handed.
Well, in using this amazing instrument of control that they have been using for 50 years, the defamation suit, and I'm talking
initially
now of
the Sedition Act.
and using the law and so on. But you know, Viswa, I suspect that this was the government's reaction, the almost automatic reaction to an irregular situation using this kind of machinery. I call the PAP machinery. But I think they probably realized that they overreacted and did a little bit of damage control at the end.
But you have Roy Ngung, you have Amos Yee, and so on, coming one after the other. At the same time, the government has been letting up in many
Yes.
other areas.
Yes.
So people are confused. And
Yes.
we've had on IQ
Absolutely.
people writing in to say, you know what, I don't want to take the risk of saying things
Absolutely.
anymore. Why bother?
Yeah.
Because we don't know where the OB markers are anymore. The
Yeah.
goalpost
Yeah.
keeps shifting.
Yeah.
In fact, some people are saying things have become so confusing today that we are in a worse off situation than when Lee Kuan Yew was Prime Minister, because those days you knew
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
you get wrapped
Yeah.
when you do this.
Yeah.
Today you're told that there's a lot more freedom and liberty,
Yeah. Yeah.
but yet you can't do
Yeah.
ABC. But is that really true?
I think so. You talked about confusion. I was a little bit confused. I'll give you a specific example. Immediately after the shock election of 2011, I was so elated when the Prime Minister, with effusive contrition, promised change, promised to listen to the people. And I thought, hey, we are going to have a real loosening up. Not just, as I describe it, a tweaking around the edges. We are going to have a real overhaul. But then I watched over the months, nothing changed. Nothing changed. The same instruments were used. So it is a little bit of a mixed situation. But I'll tell you what my surmise is for the future. The present government has no choice but to loosen up, if only because of changes. And I predict that after the coming very
upcoming
important
GE,
election, when we will see the emergence and the lineup, that this PAP government will have no choice but to let the young leaders take over and not intervene in any way if they decide on a loosening up, which I think they will, because they have to be with the times. They have to be with the times. It is a totally new generation now, a new game with new rules. You see a lot of young people who are very vocal, not like us, not like our generation, not like our parents who are very kwai, very compliant, very happy. People in my generation, happy to have modern sanitation. This was during the Lee Kuan Yew era. No
Basic
more
needs.
now. No more now. Young people, you can't use the old, these old platitudes to appeal to them.
I mean, as you said, the qualitative
Absolutely.
shift. Less quantitative,
It's a
more qualitative.
very, very big shift. And I'm glad it's happening. Otherwise,
No, but what you're saying is something, I completely agree with. It's so commonsensical, but then common sense is not very common
That's right.
these days.
That's right.
So when you talk about this, why must we wait until the next GE? From the last GE, the indications were very, very clear that people wanted a lot more opening up of the space.
Yes.
Now, there are people who believe that, and there are people in government who also sincerely believe
Yes.
that today in Singapore, you can say much about anything.
Yes.
Right? As long as it's not libelous,
That's right.
or defamatory,
That's
you can
right.
actually go out there and say it. And to some extent, I believe you can. For example, when I decided to launch IQ, many of my friends cautioned me. They said, hey, are you sure? Why are you such an itchy backside? Right? You're doing okay. Why must you go and do this? I said, no, because I think there are people out there who want a platform to talk,
Yes.
to articulate, and there may not be that many platforms. But there were so many people out of genuine concern. Our generation and people who are established in the careers, cautionary.
Yeah.
Right? Which brings me to the penultimate question. What do you think is the biggest reason why Singaporeans, and especially educated, articulate Singaporeans, do not want to be engaged on things that matter?
Absolutely. 3 words.
Why?
Climate of fear. I think it is still around. I'm not talking of that raw kind of fear you get in a military situation. People look over the shoulders, the fear
more
of the
insidious.
barbed wire, the hobnail. No, it's a most subtle but a very real fear. Fear of what? Fear of losing the good life, fear of a government perceived as vindictive and unforgiving. I'll give you a little anecdote very quickly.
Okay.
Years ago, this was like two general elections ago, I have a friend, she's highly educated, right? One day she told me, she said, I have to vote for the PAP in the coming elections. I said, what do you mean you have to vote? She says, oh, I would like to vote for the opposition. But now you're going to absolutely be startled by this. She says, my son-in-law is due for a promotion. And I went, oh, the fear of Singaporeans thinking that our system is not transparent. I have full faith in our voting system. And the fear that her vote could be traced, the fear that her son-in-law would not get that promotion. And I see it around. And it has led to something which I think is possibly the worst effect. Self-censorship. I don't think the government, is responsible for this fear, this raw kind of fear. It's self-censorship, and in a way, I'm not even sure I blame the people. It has been around for so long. It was, in a way, the old era, the old PAP era, where the government said, we want to do things through fear. In fact, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew actually said, I'd rather be feared than liked and respected.
Yeah.
Right? Now, it was okay. It worked beautifully in the old regime,
yes.
but not now.
Not now. Because we have moved up the hierarchy of needs, right? But let me present to you a different way of seeing it. This is the way I see it.
Sure.
I think to some extent, people who are established, who are educated, who are capable of engaging the government, for example, for the greater good of Singapore, have decided to abdicate that responsibility. Abdicate.
Wow.
And I'm using the word abdicate primarily because of intellectual hypocrisy.
Wow, you are using very strong
I'm using
terms,
strong
intellectual
words, because
hypocrisy.
some of the most hypocritical people I've met who have views but do not want to go out there on a limb, do not want to go out there and state their piece, but want others to fight the battles for them. No, this is what I mean.
Okay.
But it's very convenient to hide behind this veneer of fear. I know of people who are quite happy for others to do the dirty work, who get into trouble. I've had people tell me, when I ask them, why don't you come and speak up? They say, no, you want me to get in trouble? But they're very critical of me and say, why don't you push the boundaries?
Okay.
But there's a lot of this. So intellectual hypocrisy. What do you think of that?
My view, of these people is related not so much to your, in fact, I can see very strong annoyance here. I'm a great reader of human nature, which is universal, which is across cultures. In every society in the world, you will have, I would say, 90%, 95%, 97% of people who are quite happy to earn their living, to take care of their family, and to leave things to others. It's absolutely natural. People like ourselves who are who are adamant about certain things, we are the minority. But the fault there is in wanting other people to do your work for you.
Yes.
Now, that one I'm against. If you're just happy doing your own thing.
Have you seen that? I'm seeing more and more of that.
Oh dear, no.
People who are critical of others who are doing their work, but who are not prepared to step into the arena and do their part.
Okay.
And for me, I'm seeing selfishness, self-centeredness.
It's also dishonesty.
Dishonesty, that's what I mean by intellectual hypocrisy. Personally, I don't see this duplicity when I'm dealing with people who may not be as successful in life or as educated, There's a certain straightforwardness and forthrightness. So while I agree with you to some extent that there is this insidious climate of fear factor that's holding people back, I think there's also this other thing about lacking courage to do what you want others to do.
Okay.
Right.
That I agree. Lacking courage. We see it everywhere.
So, interest of time, final question, okay? Before I ask you to state what your inconvenient question for our audiences. Do you think Singapore is ready for a non-Chinese Prime Minister?
For a non-Chinese, yes. In fact, there's one minister I'm thinking of whom I would welcome as PM anytime, and he's Indian.
You're talking about Tharman?
Tharman, yeah. He's virtually everybody's favorite, Somehow, there's something about Mr. Tharman. I think the sincerity that gets across. Yes.
But why do you think there is still this concern? Even PM in his recent interview with Time magazine, he highlighted that we could consider a non-Chinese Prime Minister as long as he is able to communicate to the Chinese crowd in their language.
Yeah.
Is that necessary?
No, in their language, meaning the Chinese language, or communicate.
No, Chinese language. That's
no, it's not necessary. Oh, no. I think Singapore is not ready, for example, for a female prime minister.
Oh, that's a different issue.
Yeah, that's a different issue.
We'll get you back to talk about that. Right. Now, what's the inconvenient question that you'd want to put to our audience?
It's related to what we were talking about, Why this fear? Why are Singaporeans, so held back by fear? I don't think it's even necessary. But it is a kind of self-censorship, which I think does no good to anyone in the long run.
And it's worse.
And I don't like it.
And it's worse than censorship.
It's worse than censorship. And in a way, it works, the powers that be must be very glad of it to say, hey, we are doing nothing, but people are censoring themselves. I see it everywhere, in institutions, bosses. I have people who tell me, no, I couldn't do this. My boss wouldn't like it. And I say, hey, wait a minute. So I suppose we have a long way to go, Viswa? We have a long way to go to get Singaporeans involved, to get them engaged.
We have a long way to go, but not much time.
Not much time. Oh, you are far more pessimistic than me.
I'm not pessimistic. I feel that there's a greater urgency for us to shift the tide.
Yeah.
And well, Catherine, thank you very much for joining me today. As always, it's such a joy to communicate with you.
And fun to talk to you.
And may you live another 100 years.
Oh, no. Don't wish that upon me, please.
Thank you. Well, that was the inimitable Catherine Lim. Now, this has been IQ Hit List. And log in to our website, www.iq.sg, to watch out for our next IQ Hit List. Now, click the links to see other guests who have appeared on our previous episodes. Now, post your comments on social media and let us know if there's someone you would like us to interview on our hit list. Thank you.